Hi everyone, welcome back to the Vespid 7-second scale Jagdpanther project, part 2 now. In this video you will see the whole painting and weathering process. So without further ado, let's begin. In the end of part 1 I completed the whole assembling process and the kit was in its grey plastic color. The first step was to apply a dark grey color over the whole model, which will help me with fake shadows and pre-shading. For the camouflage base color I used the Tamiya dark yellow, which I applied highly diluted and in a quite uneven layer. I'm not quite concerned with color cover right now because as this is a 3-color camouflage pattern, I just prefer to establish the overall colors and contours and later revisit each color with more attention. I'm not a big fan of masking, especially in AFV models that have very intricate surface and details, just waiting to be ripped off with minor effort. So I draw the camouflage contours with a 0.5mm mechanic pencil. These lines help to guide while painting the dark green and red-brown areas without the need to keep checking the color profiles or making mistakes while freehand airbrushing. To minimize overspray, I use roughly 9 parts of 96% alcohol and 1 part paint, preferably matte colors. This is my personal preference. I like to slowly build the lines and coverage, and also I don't work quite well with glossy finishes while doing this kind of painting. The dark green went pretty well, but the red-brown was turning very desaturated. I'm not sure if that happened as a consequence of dilution ratio and air pressure, but it really looked odd. To fix the shade I added red hull color in a 1:1 ratio with red-brown, making it darker and more saturated. Now that I've established the base colors, it's time to revisit each one and enhance its contours and color variations. I kept using the base colors, aka dark yellow, dark green and a mix of red, brown and red hull, but this time adding some drops of Tamiya buff in a post-shading process. This addition has to be done carefully and slowly to not overkill the effect. Too much shade variation might turn odd in 7-second scale, making it quite cartoonish in my opinion. Keeping the paints highly diluted will help you to smooth contrasts between camouflage colors and also disguise oversprayed areas. The whole process is a back and forth effort, so some patience is required. However, the final result is quite rewarding and it's a nice foundation for the whole world of effects that are coming up. Next step is to apply a coat of gloss varnish. This procedure is a good measure to apply decals and avoid silvering and adherence issues. The decals are quite good and just a bit of softener is needed to ensure that the decal will embrace the surface texture. When they are dried, I apply the semi-matte varnish to seal everything. The camouflage seemed a little too dark, mostly due to the gloss varnish that saturates the colors. To bring it back to the effect I want, I airbrushed a filter of Tamiya buff. Okay, let's paint the tools. I use acrylics for that, and I like neutral gray for metal parts as a base color and use lighter shades and wet blending for color variation. Exhausts are painted in the same manner, however I try to make a stain-like effect, with more contrast between gray and off-white colors, and also added some spots of dark umber that will be visible after an enamel filter. This filter is the AK Streaking Grime, which has a rusty brown shade. First I apply it in a thin layer, and while the paint is still wet I use a dry and clean brush to tone down the color until the underlayer color contrast and effect could be visible again. I use the same effects on the other tools, but now in a much more subtle approach, just to give a warm effect. I really like wet blending with acrylics. This technique is quite simple and consists of applying different shades of colors while the base color is still wet. To blend the colors, you have to do some stippling with a moisture brush, creating a smooth transition between colors. You can see how the effect builds up on the spare tracks and tools handles. If the resulting contrast is too strong, you can always tone it down with a filter and tie everything together. The wood jacking block painting was done with first coat of Vallejo English uniform. When the color was dry, I started painting some streaks with different shades of brown and beige to simulate the wood grains. After I was satisfied with the result, I applied a thin layer of dark umber close to the metal straps, just like a wash, to cast some fake shadows. It could be done later with oils, but as I was already working with acrylics, I decided to do it with them. Then I painted the metal straps with Vallejo mahogany, which is slightly lighter than the red-brown, giving a highlight effect. Okay, starting the weathering process. First effect is the chipping. I like to start with lighter shades of camouflage colors to simulate scratches due to the operational use of this vehicle, like driving through vegetation, being hit by shrapnel, and even damage caused by the crew itself. Over the dark yellow, I use a mix of khaki and Jagdpanther. On the dark green, I use green-gray, and over red-brown, I use mahogany. I focus these effects on areas close to sharp edges, like the junction between the roof and sidewalls of the casemate, mud guards, the front of the tank, where it's more exposed, and other areas subject to damage. Basically the whole tank. I also use this technique to highlight some edges and help with color variation to make it more eye-catching. When I was satisfied with the result, I started filling some scratches with a mix of burnt umber and dark gray to mimic the steel color. I didn't fill them all because I like the effect of only superficial scratches that don't go all the way to the steel plates. So I focused this effect where scratches are more concentrated and of course in some spots here and there to also create a more interesting visual look. The same procedure was done to the wheels, however I won't show you much of it because I had a hard time to keep a nice focus while recording and also to not get too repetitive. In the middle of the weathering process, I realized that I forgot to replace the plastic handle of the tool storage bucket. So I made some of copper sheet and replaced them. It got a little off scale, but better than the original ones. The periscopes were painted with shades of grey using wet blending to give some depth perception. That was a little hard to do because they have really tiny areas and was quite difficult to do it without mistakenly painting some of the surrounding areas. If you move quickly enough, it's possible to wash away the undesired painting with water and a clean brush. To increase the painting wearing, I used AK streaking grime over the deep chipping spots. This will give a slight appearance of rust coming out from the exposed steel. On the casemate walls, I applied it more concentrated on the upper chipped areas and made some streaks downwards. To clean the excess and better shape the streaking effect, I use a brush moistured with turpentine. As the previous effects were made with acrylics, there is a minor chance of ruining it with enamel painting. Blending the rust tone with the camouflage leaves a subtle color variation, especially on the dark yellow areas, which I think gives a realistic look to the model. Now moving to some half dirt. This is my homemade mud. It consists of some static grass mixed with marble powder, water and some acrylic paint. The color paint through here really doesn't matter right now, its function is more as a fixer than providing the final mud color. Alternatively, you can use PVA glue. The idea is to make a paste and apply it directly on the model. Another way to do this in a last definitive finish is to scrape off some pastel to give color and mix it with other fine material, water and a tiny, and I mean tiny, drop of PVA glue. The less PVA glue you use, the better. You can apply this mix on the model and after it dried, reactivate it with water to clean the undesired excesses. If you use too much glue in the mix, you will end up with PVA residue on your model and it will be much harder to reactivate the mix. This pastel color actually got quite weird, but I did it on purpose to better show you how it works. With a stipple motion in the brush, you can smooth color transitions and control where you want more or less dirt. If you really don't like the result, you can simply wash it out and start over. I added coarser grains to increase dirt texture. Applying it over the finer layer of the previous steps gives a more realistic touch in my opinion, as finer grains tends to accumulate on the bottom of a shaking surface, in this case the tank, while the coarser grains get a looser appearance on top. I fixed everything with alcohol and diluted PVA glue and then painted it with Tamiya flat earth. To paint the mud, I soaked the area with tap water and applied different shades of earth colors. In this way you got a nice and natural color variation. I decided to add some crates and storage on the back of the tank. I have these resin boxes and jerry cans from a long time. They are really not the best, but also not terrible. I started painting the wood ones, again using wet blending, and starting from the darker colors and moving to the lighter ones. The lighter shades can be used to simulate scratches on the woods and also to highlight some contours. In the end I went back to the darker shades to tone down the overall color, almost like a wash. Painting this storage seems difficult at first look, but when you find a good recipe, it is just fun. The tarps were made of Tamiya smooth surface epoxy putty. To make it as thin as possible, I used a roll and baby powder to avoid it sticking everywhere. When I got the desired thickness, I cut the shapes I want and placed them over the boxes. Using a brush moistened with water and a toothpick, I gave the shape I wanted. I had to make it a few times until I got the effect I want. And at first it looks more like a chewed gum, but later with the painting job it looked much better. Then a quick filter of Tamiya buff to tie everything together. Well, the tracks. First I painted them with earth colors, but didn't really like the result, and as I'm not sure what kind of terrain I'm going to use on the base, I decided to kind of start over. So I airbrushed dark gray colors unevenly to make it more clean, and started to use earth tones again, but in a more subtle approach. I painted the polished areas of the tracks with a Prismacolor pencil. This detail is quite subtle, but really adds a lot to the model. So, the tracks are pretty much done. They are quite clean, but in this way it will be easier to harmonize the tank with the base. I rubbed graphite on the sprocket wheel's teeth to give it a polished metal finish. I also made it on the idle wheels, where there is metal on metal contact. Much of this effect will be hidden or hard to notice, however it's a nice touch to the model. I didn't record the wheels and tracks final assembly, because you have already had enough freak show on part 1, right? So after accomplishing this task, I airbrushed a very diluted Tamiya flat earth and buff, again, over the model. You probably already noticed that I repeat this step quite a few times, and there is a reason for that. I prefer to slowly build the dust effect without risking losing previous details, because at this stage mistakes can almost be irreversible. The same caution was taken with rain marks. I rather use super diluted paint and repeat the process as many times as needed instead of risking an overkill effect. This way you can lean back on the chair, take a good look on the model, and then decide to go on the effect or stop it. Next, I dry brushed the coarser grains on dirty areas to create more contrast and prepare it for the washes. I made 3 wash colors with oils, one for each camouflage color. Basically they are just darker shades of each camouflage color, but yet not too dark, just enough to create contrasts. I like to use pin wash to keep control of where I want to make shadows and also to keep the colors and effects I made so far. For the tracks I just use a darker brown wash. And in places I want to give a deeper effect, I blended the excess wash to the painting with a clean and moisture brush. The MG34 was painted with Vallejo neutral gray and later applied a filter of black oil, rubbing it with a clean brush to wipe out the excess. I also rubbed black oil on the exhaust to simulate the engine soot. My idea for the diorama is to add some vegetation to the tank, so I wrapped the casemate sides with 0.1mm copper wire to help holding the branches and twigs, just like they used to do in World War II. Then I painted it with neutral gray and applied AK streaking grime to give a rust finish to the wire. The same effect was done to the tow cables. Then I gave the periscopes a final coat of Tamiya smoke to give them a glass look and made some speckling with acrylics earth tones diluted with tap water on the front and side of the tank. To do it, just get some paint with the brush and stroke it against some pin or needle close to the model. This technique is super simple to make and adds a realistic touch to the model. So the model was pretty much done at this stage. I showed it to a modeler friend and he pointed out that I could make more dust effects on the horizontal surface, as they naturally gather more dust. So I mixed some oils to get the colors I want, left the paint on a cardboard to absorb most of the oil and worked the effect with the paint as a thick paste. With a stippling motion I built the effect, concentrating it on areas more likely to collect dust. With a brush moisture with turpentine, I removed the paint in some areas to create an uneven layer of dust, to simulate marks left from the crew while sitting or doing something on the roof of the tank. Now I can call it finished, at least until I start the diorama. I probably will make the road wheels and tracks more dustier for the diorama. I will do it when I decide how the terrain and colors are going to be. I really enjoyed the kit assembling and painting and liked a lot the final result. Sorry if I rushed the video, but I'm still figuring out how to record and edit the videos and how long they are going to be. I will probably start making shorter videos from each main step of the assembly and painting, so I can go through all techniques and better describe how I make them, without bothering you to that, or flooding the video with information in a sprinter pace. Next video of this project will be the figures, but it may take a while because I still need to figure them out. So meanwhile, I will probably post videos from another project. And that's it for this video. I hope you also liked the painting and final result. If you like it, please hit the like button and subscribe. See you in the next time. Cheers!